She sat across from me, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "He's not the man I married," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I can't put my finger on what's changed." Emma's words hung in the air like a distant echo of heartbreak. Her auburn hair was neatly tucked behind her ears, but the subtle tremor in her hands betrayed the calm exterior she was trying so hard to maintain. "Start from the beginning," I said gently. "When did you first feel something was off?" She hesitated, her eyes searching for a safe place to land. Finally, they settled on the framed painting on the wall behind me, a calming depiction of a sailboat on tranquil waters. "It wasn't sudden," she admitted. "If it had been, I think I could have reacted. But this has been like a slow leak, you know. At first, I didn't even notice it. I told myself I was overthinking things." Emma leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Daniel used to be so present. We'd talk about everything, our days, our dreams, silly things. But now, it's like he's there, but he's gone. Always distracted. His phone is practically glued to his hand." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "A couple of months ago, I woke up in the middle of the night. He wasn't in bed, and the light in the living room was on. When I went to check, there he was, sitting on the couch with his phone. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he couldn't sleep, that he was just scrolling through news articles. But he turned the screen away from me so quickly." She trailed off, a pained expression crossing her face. I didn't say anything at the time, but it felt wrong. Since then, there's been this gnawing feeling I can't shake. He's working late more often, coming home smelling like cologne that isn't his. And when I ask him about it, he gets defensive, like I'm the one doing something wrong. Have you talked to him about how you're feeling?" I asked. Emma let out a hollow laugh. "I've tried. Every time, he says I'm imagining things. That I'm being paranoid. Last week, I told him it felt like we were drifting apart, and he just said, 'You're overthinking again, Em. Work has been stressful, that's all.' But it's not just work." She paused, her fingers tightening around the armrest of the chair. "Yesterday, I saw a message on his phone. I wasn't trying to snoop, it just popped up while he was in the shower. It said, 'Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again.' And it wasn't from me." Her voice broke on the last word, and tears filled her eyes. I reached for the box of tissues on the side table, offering it to her. "That must have been incredibly painful to see." "It was," she said, dabbing at her tears. "But what's worse is that I couldn't confront him. I felt frozen, like if I said it out loud, it would make it real. I don't even know who I'd be angrier at, him for doing it, or me for not seeing it sooner." "Emma, let me ask you something," I said after a moment. "If you could wave a magic wand and know the truth, without any doubt, would you want to?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. "Yes," she whispered. "But I'm terrified of what I might find out." Infidelity is a subject that strikes deep, stirring a mix of emotions and difficult questions. Have you ever faced a moment where you felt something was wrong but didn't know how to confront it? I'd love to hear your thoughts or stories about navigating trust and doubt in relationships. Feel free to share in the comments below, your perspective could help someone else facing a similar struggle. As I sat with Emma, I could see the weight of uncertainty crushing her. She was caught between two painful realities, staying in the dark or exposing the truth. For many, that choice is paralyzing, but it's also the first step toward clarity. Sometimes, our intuition is our greatest ally, I told her. It's not paranoia, it's your inner voice telling you something's off. The question is, what do you want to do with that voice? Emma looked up at me, a flicker of determination breaking through the sadness in her eyes. I don't know yet. But I know I can't keep pretending everything's fine. And with that, the first crack in the dam appeared. I can't get it out of my head, Emma said, her voice tight with frustration. That message last night was amazing. Who is she? What did they do? And why is he pretending like nothing is wrong? Her words tumbled out like a stream breaking through a dam. It was clear that the discovery had festered, turning her mind into a battlefield of questions and doubts. What happened after you saw the message? I asked. I put the phone down and walked out of the room, Emma said, her tone trembling between anger and despair. The moment he got out of the shower, I couldn't even look at him. I just kept asking myself, what's the point? If I confront him and he lies again, I'll feel even worse. If he tells the truth, she trailed off, her expression pained. I'm not sure I'm ready to hear it. Emma paused, leaning back in the chair as if the weight of her thoughts were pulling her down. But the not knowing is eating me alive. I'm constantly watching him now. Every time his phone buzzes, I feel this jolt in my chest. I check his clothes for signs, his car for anything suspicious. I've even thought about following him after work. How does that make you feel? I asked. Like I'm losing myself, she admitted. I've never been this person before, the one who snoops, who questions everything. I hate it. But I hate feeling this powerless even more. I nodded. It's understandable, Emma. When trust is shaken, it's natural to want to regain some sense of control. But what you're describing is exhausting, isn't it? It's beyond exhausting, she said, rubbing her temples. And the worst part is, I know he knows something's up. He's been more defensive lately, like last night. He came home late again, and when I asked where he was, he snapped at me. Can't I work late without you jumping down my throat? That's what he said. Emma's face flushed with anger as she recounted the argument. I told him I was just asking, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept turning it around, saying I was smothering him, that I was acting crazy. How did you respond? I told him that if he had nothing to hide, he wouldn't be so defensive. She sighed, shaking her head. That really set him off. He grabbed his keys and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Emma glanced at me, her expression a mix of guilt and indignation. Am I crazy? Am I overreacting? Maybe he really is just stressed at work and I'm blowing this out of proportion. What do you think deep down? I asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away. Deep down, she said quietly, I think he's lying to me. And I think I'm scared to find out just how much. Later in the session, Emma described more moments that had chipped away at her peace of mind. The business trips he'd started taking more frequently, the way he'd begun wearing cologne again after years of not caring about such things. She recounted how he'd laughed off her concerns about the perfume on his shirt, saying he'd hugged a colleague at work. Maybe it was innocent, Emma said, but when you add it all together, the phone, the late nights, the message, it feels like too much to ignore. And yet, every time I try to confront him, I end up feeling like the bad guy. Like I'm the one ruining our marriage. You're not ruining anything, I assured her. You're responding to a situation that feels wrong to you. It's important to honor your feelings, even if they're uncomfortable. Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. I wish I could just know for sure. One way or the other. At least then, I'd know what to do. Emma's story shows how deeply uncertainty can affect a person's peace of mind. Have you ever found yourself doubting your instincts, questioning whether you're overreacting? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your experiences or thoughts. Your comments might resonate with someone else going through a tough time. As we wrapped up the session, I could see the storm of emotions swirling behind Emma's composed exterior. Her fear, her anger, her heartbreak, they were all there, fighting for dominance. Emma, I said, you've taken an important step by talking about this. It's not easy to face these feelings, but you're not alone in this. The next step is deciding how you want to approach the situation, not out of fear, but from a place of strength. She nodded, but her expression remained clouded. I just wish I knew how to get there, she murmured. We'll figure it out together, I said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. As she left, I couldn't help but think of the countless others who've sat in that same chair, grappling with the same doubts and fears. Trust is such a fragile thing, and once it's fractured, the path to healing, whether as a couple or as an individual, is never simple. But it's always possible. I can't do this anymore, Emma said, her voice trembling as she sank into the chair. I feel like I'm unraveling, and I need to know the truth, even if it destroys me. The tension in her shoulders spoke volumes. Emma had reached the breaking point, where uncertainty had become more unbearable than the fear of what she might uncover. What brought you to this decision? I asked. She exhaled shakily, clasping her hands together. It was something small, but it broke the dam. Yesterday, he was in the shower, and his phone buzzed. I wasn't even looking for it, it just lit up on the counter. It was her again. The same name. And the message said, "Can't wait for Friday night." Same place. Emma's voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. I felt like my chest was going to explode. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but I froze. Instead, I copied the number into my phone and left the room. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I started searching for anything that could confirm my suspicions. She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a tissue. And I found it. On his credit card statement, there were charges at this restaurant we used to go to. On nights he said he was working late. Then I checked social media, and there it was. A photo of him and her, smiling at a table. Someone had tagged her in it. My stomach clenched as I listened, imagining the pain she must have felt in that moment. What did you do when you saw it? Emma shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just sat there staring at the screen. It was like my whole world shattered. All the little things I tried to brush off, his defensiveness, the perfume, the message, suddenly made sense. I felt like such a fool for not trusting myself sooner. She wiped her eyes and sat up straighter, a flicker of anger breaking through the sadness. This morning, I confronted him. I showed him the photo and the messages. At first, he denied it, said it was just a colleague, that I was blowing it out of proportion. But when I mentioned the restaurant charges, he finally admitted it. What did he say? I asked gently. Emma's jaw tightened. He said it wasn't what I thought. That it was just an emotional connection, nothing physical. As if that makes it okay. Her voice rose, the hurt spilling out in waves. He said he turned to her because he felt like I wasn't there for him anymore. That I was always stressed or too busy. But that's not fair. I've been carrying this marriage, trying to hold everything together, and he's blaming me for his betrayal. She clenched her fists, her anger giving her words sharp edges. I told him I couldn't even look at him, and I left. I don't know what to do now. How do you move forward when someone you love breaks your trust like that? We sat in silence for a moment, letting her emotions settle. Emma, I said carefully, it's normal to feel angry and hurt right now. What he did, whether emotional or physical, violated the trust in your marriage. And it's not your fault. Betrayal is a choice he made, regardless of the challenges you were facing as a couple. Her eyes softened, the anger melting into sadness. But what if he's right, she whispered. What if I did push him away without realizing it? Even if there were challenges in your marriage, I replied, there are healthy ways to address them, ways that involve communication and honesty. Turning to someone else wasn't the solution. That choice is on him, not you. Emma nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her expression. I just don't know what to do next. Do I stay? Do I leave? How do I even begin to process this? Right now, I said, it's okay not to have all the answers. What's important is giving yourself space to feel what you're feeling. Betrayal takes time to process, and you don't have to make any decisions until you're ready. Emma's pain is something many of us can relate to, feeling betrayed by someone you trusted completely. Have you ever faced a moment where you uncovered something you wished you hadn't? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insight might help someone else who's struggling with their own storm. As the session continued, I encouraged Emma to focus on her own needs and boundaries. The next step, I told her, is deciding what healing looks like for you. Whether that involves rebuilding trust or moving forward on your own, the choice should be about what feels right for you, not what others expect. Emma seemed to take in my words, her expression softening as she considered them. I think I need time, she said finally. Time to figure out what I want and whether I can ever trust him again. That's a good place to start, I said with a reassuring smile. And remember, you don't have to navigate this alone. I'll be here to support you every step of the way. As she left the room, I could see the weight of the revelation still heavy on her shoulders, but there was also a hint of something new, determination. Despite the pain, Emma was beginning to reclaim her power, one step at a time. Emma walked into my office, her posture straighter than I'd seen in weeks. There was still a shadow of sadness in her eyes, but today it seemed tempered with a quiet resolve. I talked to him, she said, settling into the chair. We had a real conversation. No yelling, no blaming, just talking. And for the first time, I feel like I understand why this happened. I leaned forward slightly. How did the conversation start? It was awkward, she admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't even know what to say at first. But then he said, Emma, I know I hurt you, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. And that broke something in me. For the first time, he wasn't defensive or trying to deflect. He just owned it. Her voice softened as she continued. He told me he'd been feeling invisible. Like we'd fallen into a routine where we were more like roommates than partners. He said he didn't know how to talk to me about it, and instead of dealing with it, he looked for validation somewhere else. He swears it never became physical, but... She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know if I believe him. Part of me wants to, but another part keeps asking, does it even matter? He still broke my trust. How did you respond to him? I asked. I told him the truth, she said, her tone steady. That I feel betrayed, that I'm angry and hurt, and that I don't know if I can ever trust him again. But I also told him that I don't want to make any decisions out of anger. I want to understand what went wrong so I can decide if this is something we can rebuild, or if it's time to walk away. Her words hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty but also courage. He said he's willing to do whatever it takes to earn back my trust. He even suggested therapy, couples counseling. We spent the next part of the session unpacking what Emma wanted from this process. Part of me feels like trying therapy is a betrayal of myself, she said. Like I'm saying what he did was okay. But another part of me wonders if walking away without trying would leave me with regrets. Therapy doesn't mean you're excusing his actions, I said. It's a way to explore whether there's a path forward that feels right for you both. And even if you decide to end the marriage, it can provide closure and understanding for both of you. Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. I guess I just don't know what I'm fighting for anymore. I don't even recognize our marriage right now. That's understandable, I said. Betrayal changes the landscape of a relationship. If you choose to rebuild, it won't be about going back to what you had before, it'll be about creating something new. And that takes time, honesty, and commitment from both of you. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Daniel started therapy together. In our individual sessions, she shared her thoughts about the process. At first, it was so awkward, she said. We were both so guarded, afraid to really say what we felt. But the therapist helped us peel back those layers. And you know what I realized? I've been holding on to resentment too. For years, I've felt like I was carrying more of the emotional and mental load in our marriage, but I never told him how much it bothered me. I just buried it and kept going. That's an important insight, I said. Do you feel like you're starting to communicate better? She nodded. It's not perfect, but it's progress. Daniel's been more open about his feelings than I've ever seen him. He's admitted that he felt like he couldn't measure up, like he was failing me as a husband. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps me understand why he made those choices. Emma hesitated, her expression conflicted. But I'm still so angry. Some days, I look at him and all I can think about is what he did. How do you get past that? Forgiveness is a process, not a destination, I said. It's okay to feel angry, and it's okay to take your time. The goal isn't to erase what happened, it's to decide how you want to move forward with that knowledge. Have you ever been in a situation where forgiveness felt like the hardest thing to give? Or maybe you've struggled to rebuild trust after someone hurt you. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your perspective could mean a lot to someone who's going through a similar experience. As Emma left that day, I could see that she was still in the midst of her healing journey. There were no easy answers or quick fixes, but she was taking steps, small but meaningful, toward clarity. Some days, I feel hopeful, she said before walking out the door. Other days, I don't. But I guess that's normal, right? It is, I replied with a reassuring smile. Healing isn't linear. You're doing the best you can, and that's enough. She nodded, her resolve shining through once again. I'll keep going, she said. One day at a time. And with that, Emma took another step forward, tentative, but determined to find her way, no matter where the journey led her. Emma sat across from me, her expression calmer than it had been in weeks. There was a noticeable change in her demeanor, still reflective, but no longer weighed down by the unbearable confusion she once carried. I think I've finally made a decision, she began, folding her hands in her lap. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of back and forth. But I know what I need to do. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I'm going to stay, she said, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. But it's not about him. It's about me. About seeing if I can rebuild this in a way that feels right for me, on my terms. What led you to this decision? I asked. Emma let out a small sigh, a mix of relief and determination. It's been a combination of things. Therapy helped, for sure. It forced us to talk about things we'd avoided for years. I realized that while his betrayal was devastating, it was a symptom of deeper issues we'd both ignored. That doesn't excuse it, it never will, but it gives me context. And context helps me decide how I want to move forward. She paused, a faint smile crossing her lips. For the first time, I feel like he's really seeing me, not just as his wife, but as a person with needs and feelings he has to acknowledge. And I've started seeing him in a new light, too. He's not just the man who hurt me, he's also someone who's willing to put in the work to make this right. That's worth trying for. As the session unfolded, Emma shared some of the boundaries she'd put in place to safeguard her emotional well-being. I told Daniel that rebuilding trust isn't just about saying he's sorry, she explained. It's about actions, consistent, honest actions. We've agreed on complete transparency, and he's been following through. Sharing his schedule, letting me see his messages, it's not about policing him, it's about showing that he's willing to earn back my trust. How has that been for you? I asked. Surprisingly, it's been helpful, she admitted. At first, I felt like I was punishing him or treating him like a child, but he doesn't see it that way. He said it's what he needs to do to prove he's serious, and that makes me feel less alone in this process. Emma hesitated before continuing. But I also told him that this isn't just about him proving himself, it's about me learning to trust myself again. Because honestly, that's been the hardest part. For months, I doubted my instincts, ignored the red flags. Rebuilding my confidence in my own judgment is something I have to do for myself. I smiled, proud of her self-awareness. That's a powerful realization, Emma. Healing isn't just about the relationship, it's also about the relationship you have with yourself. She nodded, her gaze distant for a moment. Exactly. And I've started doing things for me, too. I joined a yoga class, started journaling again. It feels good to have something that's just mine. Emma's journey highlights an important truth: rebuilding after betrayal isn't just about the other person, it's about reclaiming your own sense of self. Have you ever found ways to rediscover yourself after a challenging experience? If you're comfortable, share your story in the comments. It could inspire someone who's struggling to find their way. By the end of the session, Emma's resolve was clear. But she was also realistic about the challenges ahead. I know this isn't going to be easy, she said. There will be moments when I'll doubt him, and myself. But I've decided that I'd rather try and see if we can rebuild than walk away without giving it a chance. That's a brave choice, I said. And it's one that only you can make. The important thing is that you're doing it for yourself, not out of pressure or fear. Emma smiled, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't try to hide. Thank you, she said. For listening, for helping me see things clearly. I don't know where this path will lead, but at least I feel like I'm walking it with intention now. As she left my office that day, I couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for her. Emma's journey had been fraught with pain, doubt, and anger, but she'd faced it all with courage. Whether her marriage would ultimately survive or not, one thing was certain: she had found her strength again. And that, in itself, was a triumph.